I was watching the animated version of The Pilgrim's Progress, and the character named Supervisor 6, he said something when the first man left the town in his pursuit of Lord Jesus Christ. And then I was listening to the Bible, and I heard something very similar in the book of Genesis. And I'm like, wow, what a great example of how the enemy works. I think his name may have been like Faithful Christian, but in any event, in the movie, he was the first person to leave the town in pursuit of Lord Jesus Christ. And when the subordinate tracked him down, or tried to track him down, came across his footprints, and he knew where he had gone. And when he reported it to Supervisor 6, Supervisor 6 told him to tell the people in the village a story, but to leave some of it out, and they, in their own minds, will fill in the blanks. And that is a tool of the enemy. Especially when the enemy is in a position to see and to know more about something than you do. And he may present you with certain truths, facts, but it's not the full picture. And then either he helps you, or you by your own devices fill in the blanks by saying, well, if this is true, then the most likely assumption is this or that. And it's usually not good. And in times past, you may fill in the blanks and you are correct. But it's the enemy. He's trying to twist you up. And an example of the fill in the blanks, because there are certain facts that are presented, and based on those facts, it seems as if the only logical conclusion is something that may not be true. In Genesis 37, Jacob had sent Joseph to track down his brothers who were tending to the livestock. They thought about killing Joseph when they saw him. They put him in a pit and then sold him into slavery instead. And in Genesis 37 verses 29 through 35, it reads, Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. That's one assumption already. What was he thinking? He returned to his brothers and said, The boy's not there. As for me, where am I to go? So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, We found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not. They knew it was Joseph's tunic. Now, they didn't say, we sold Joseph into slavery, and to cover it up, we're doing this. They just presented him with some facts. Fact, it was Joseph's tunic. Fact, it was covered in blood. But it was in human blood. So what kind of conclusion was Joseph supposed to draw, or Jacob supposed to draw as a result of the facts presented? Again, these were facts. It's also things lawyers will do, and politicians, people in the media. They know that they can tell you certain things for you to draw certain conclusions, and they'll leave things out intentionally to lead you astray. And sometimes you don't find out the truth until a long time later. And prayerfully, you didn't make any rash, any bad decisions as a result of the facts they presented to you to cause you to fill in the blanks to lead you astray. Then he examined it and said, It is my son's tunic. Check. A wild beast has devoured him. See, the sons didn't have to tell him that a wild beast had devoured him. They just had to simply set the stage by presenting facts. It was Joseph's tunic. and had blood. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Recently did a message regarding in regarding in Genesis 45, when after decades, Jacob found out that his son Joseph was alive and doing well in Egypt. And initially he didn't believe. And in the message I was inspired to say, Jacob should have believed his son was alive. Because also in Genesis 37, Joseph had two dreams. The second of which Joseph declared told his father. And even his father talking about, will your mother and I and your brothers bow down to you? The dream was from the Lord. And because the Lord had spoken, if Jacob had believed Joseph's dream was from the Lord, and if he believed the word of the Lord, he would have known that somehow, by God's grace, Joseph was still alive. So he's the one who assumed that Joseph was torn apart by a beast, based on the facts he was presented, and the brothers remained silent and allowed him to fill in the blanks, and they never corrected him. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, surely I'll go down to Sheol in mourning for my son. So his father wept for him. And his sons, they weren't convicted enough, seeing their father mourn Joseph, to come clean and say, oh, Father, please forgive me. We sold him into slavery. And we did this, we did that. Nope. They let Jacob fill in the blanks, to deceive him, to think that his son was dead. So kind of like from the Pilgrim's Progress. Oh, tell him this, but don't tell him everything, and let them fill in the blanks with their minds. And we see it here with Joseph. Now, as a bonus, sometimes the devil devils do not present you with facts and allow you to fill in the blanks. Sometimes the enemy goes overboard and tells you something that is far worse than the truth. And you start making assumptions. So it's like the other side of the coin. And an example of this, in 2 Samuel 13, now judgment had come upon the house of David, the Lord's judgment. Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar. And when Absalom found out, Tamar's brother, he told her, don't worry about it. But he had a plan. And 2 years later, he had a feast and he asked his father to come. Father wouldn't come. And said, well, let Amnon come. And the father relented and Amnon went to this feast. 2 years later, seemingly like everything was okay. But in 2 Samuel 13, verses 28 through 36, Absalom commanded his servants, saying, see now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then put him to death, do not fear. Have not I myself commanded you, be courageous and be valiant? The servants of Absalom did to Amnon just as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose and each mounted his mule and fled. David had many sons. Absalom ordered his men to kill Amnon. They did so. David's other sons escaped on their mules. And it's not like they had anything to worry about, but they fled. Now, it was while they were on their way that the report came to David, saying, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Who generated that report. And one thing you may have seen in media, something happens, the media jumps on it, they're quick to report without having the facts. And sometimes the things they do is intentional, to mislead, to provoke people, to make them think that one side is bad and the other side is good, or vice versa, whatever the case may be. Not waiting for the facts. Something came out recently where, for example, CBS reporting on something that was reported 2 years ago, and now they're finally validating it. What took them so long? Others reported it and were silenced. It was tagged as being Russian misinformation or disinformation, having the hallmarks thereof. 2 years after the fact. So in this case, the king was told all of his sons were dead, but that was not the truth. Then the king arose, tore his clothes, so kind of like Jacob tearing his clothes, tore his clothes and lay on the ground, and all his servants were standing by him with clothes torn. Again, false report. Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, responded, "Do not let my lord suppose they have put to death all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. Because by the intent of Absalom, this has been determined since the day that he violated his sister Tamar." By the way, this Jonadab, he's the one who advised Amnon that resulted in him sexually assaulting Tamar. So he wasn't as clean or as heroic as he was coming across here. But he continued, "Now therefore, do not let my lord the king take the report to heart. Namely, all the king's sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead." Whether it was 1 or 10, it was still bad. But accuracy matters. Now Absalom had fled, and the young man who was the watchman, raised his eyes and looked, and behold, many people are coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. Jonadab said to the king, "Behold, the king's sons have come, according to your servant's word." So it happened. As soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voices and wept, and also the king and all his servants wept very bitterly. By the way, initially I was reluctant to add the second message, but some commonalities between Genesis 37 and 2 Samuel 13. A father received bad news. The news was bad, but it wasn't as bad as initially thought. Also, even though the length of time varied, the truth always prevails. So no matter what the enemy does, all of his deceits, eventually the truth prevails. It comes forward. Lies have a shelf life, but truths, they endure forever. So yes, so be careful about the enemy presenting you with even facts and leaving you to fill in the blanks based on things you do not know. Also, be careful of the enemy telling you things that are worse than the truth. Be careful about the first report, unless it is coming from the Most High God. The first reports tend to have inaccuracies, and in the fullness of time, you will know the truth. Like Jesus said, the truth will make you free. So be careful about making assumptions. Some things require time, but in time, you will know the truth. God bless you, and Jesus the Christ is Lord.